Alright, let me set the stage for you. This is the kind of story that'll make you question just how well you know the people closest to you. Picture this, I'm a 30-year-old guy, just minding my business, living a pretty typical life. At least, I thought it was typical. Things were good. Or at least, I thought they were. So, here's the thing, I had this best friend, Jake. We had been through thick and thin together, sharing everything from crazy nights out to the kind of deep, philosophical conversations that make you question life. We weren't just friends, we were brothers, you know? So when I started dating someone seriously, it only felt natural to include him in everything. Meet Sarah. She's my ex now, but back then, she was the one. The one I thought I was going to spend the rest of my life with. The one who knew me inside out, who could finish my sentences, who was just everything. But here's where it gets messy. I guess Jake and Sarah, two people I trusted the most, decided they'd try to pull off something I never saw coming. Something I would have never even imagined. They teamed up. And not just any kind of team up. No, they conspired in a way that left me reeling. It all started after Sarah and I split. And when I say split, I mean it wasn't some clean break. It wasn't mutual. There were fights, accusations, and a lot of messy emotions tossed around. But in the end, she walked away. Or so I thought. What they didn't know, what neither of them had a clue about, was that I wasn't as naive as they thought. The entire time, I'd been watching them. Calculating. Seeing the cracks in the facade. They'd made their move without me knowing, but I wasn't as caught off guard as they assumed. I remember the moment it all clicked. I had just returned from a trip, tired and mentally drained. I was hoping for a quiet night to decompress, but when I checked my phone, there it was, a text from Jake. Just a few words that made my stomach drop. We need to talk. Meet us tomorrow. I didn't have a clue what he meant, but something felt off. I wasn't sure if it was just me being paranoid or if my instincts were finally kicking in. So, I showed up. And what I walked into, well, it was something I wouldn't have expected in 1,000 years. When I walked into the room, the tension was thick. It was like I could cut it with a knife. Jake and Sarah were sitting there, looking like they had just made a deal they were way too pleased about. Their eyes met mine, and there was this strange satisfaction in both of their gazes. It was like they were waiting for me to figure it out, like I was the last piece of a puzzle they were so proud of. But they didn't know me as well as they thought. Sarah was the first to speak, her voice smooth, almost rehearsed. We need to talk about the future, your future, Jake and I both. The way she said Jake and I hit me like a ton of bricks. There was no mistaking it now. This wasn't some casual chat. They had something up their sleeves. And that's when they dropped the bomb. They were after Alimony. I could feel my blood pressure spike as they explained. Sarah, with her carefully curated vulnerability, painted herself as the victim. Poor thing, she said. She needed support. Emotional and financial. She wasn't able to make ends meet on her own, they claimed. And Jake, my best friend, the one who knew everything about me, was standing right there, nodding like it was the most obvious thing in the world. The shock hit me like a freight train, but I couldn't let them see how much it affected me. Not yet. I had to keep my cool. After all, I wasn't as blindsided as they thought. I had been planning for this moment, just waiting for the perfect time to strike. I leaned back, keeping my expression neutral, even though my heart was racing. You know, this is all very cute, I said, my voice calm, too calm for what I was feeling inside, but you're both a little too late. I already knew you'd try this. For a moment, there was silence. Jake's face faltered. Sarah, though, she just smiled like she knew she'd won. She had no idea what was coming. It wasn't arrogance that kept me composed. It was something else. A quiet confidence that I had been building up for months. You see, while they were plotting their next move, I was already several steps ahead. I had planned for this moment. And now that I had them right where I wanted them, I was about to take control. But trust me, I'm not going to make this easy for them. They thought they were smart. They thought they could outsmart me. And for a while, they did. But here's the thing, they never realized that I was always one step ahead. Now, it's my turn to call the shots. And believe me, I'm about to turn the tables in ways they'll never see coming. This story? It's not just about revenge. It's about strategy. It's about playing the long game. And if you think you've figured me out, just wait. You'll see how this all unfolds. And trust me, it gets way crazier from here. Alright, now the real fun begins. You know how they say things can only go so smoothly before something goes horribly wrong? Well, that's exactly what happened. I wasn't prepared for the next curveball, but let me tell you, it came at me fast and hard. After that little meeting where Sarah and Jake thought they had me in a chokehold, I left with this quiet fire in my gut. I knew what I had to do, but I had to be careful. They weren't just some random people out to get me, they were people I knew, people I trusted. And you know what they say about betrayal? It stings harder when it comes from someone you thought would have your back. The first thing I did was call up my lawyer. Not the usual guy I worked with, no. This time, I needed someone who could really go to bat for me. I needed someone sharp. Someone who wasn't going to just sit back and wait for the other side to make a move. I needed someone who could think outside the box, like I was about to. So, I found a lawyer who was a bit of a wild card, someone who understood how to play the game, but didn't mind bending the rules just enough to make sure the other side was caught off guard. But I still had a feeling they were going to try and get the jump on me, so I wasn't taking any chances. I did my homework. I dug into Sarah's finances, checked every public record I could find. And I didn't stop there. I started keeping tabs on Jake. Where he went. Who he talked to. What he did when he thought no one was looking. It wasn't paranoia, it was strategy. And every little detail I uncovered started to build a picture I didn't like. Then the day came when they hit me with the formal papers. I remember opening that envelope and reading through the petition like it was some kind of sick joke. Alimony, child support, even though there was no kid, and the kicker, shared assets from the time we were together. I couldn't believe it. They were trying to pull every card, even the ones they didn't have. And the worst part? It wasn't just about money. It was about control. But here's the thing, they underestimated me. And I'm not talking about some arrogant, naive I'll show them kind of confidence. No. I'm talking about the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you've got something they don't. Something they'll never see coming. I spent the next few days quietly laying my own traps. Each step I took felt like I was one-upping them at their own game, but I had to make sure they didn't catch on. You've got to be subtle when you're outsmarting people who think they're already ahead. I'm talking small moves, things like filing a counterclaim that would challenge their financial records, gathering evidence to prove Sarah's lifestyle didn't match the poor, struggling woman act she was putting on. But it wasn't just about finances. Oh no, there was something bigger at play here. Something that would hit them where it really hurt. And that's why I started digging into Jake's past. Because trust me, no one gets to screw me over without me knowing exactly what skeletons are hiding in their closet. I didn't have to look too far. As soon as I started pulling the threads, everything started unraveling. It turns out Jake had been less than honest about his own finances. Some old debts, shady deals with people who had no business being in his life. It was like finding a treasure trove of ammunition just waiting to be fired. I started taking screenshots of everything I could. Bank records, texts, messages between him and Sarah. Everything that could back up my claim that this whole alimony thing was a sham. Every time they tried to press me for something, I pushed back just a little harder until they started getting nervous. The tables were starting to turn, but it wasn't enough yet. I needed something big. A bombshell that would put everything into perspective for them. Something that would make them wish they never crossed me. But here's where it got really interesting. One night, I got a call. It was from an old mutual friend, someone who had been close to both Sarah and Jake before all of this. At first, I didn't think much of it. People like that tend to stir the pot without offering much. But this time, they had some real info. Apparently, Sarah and Jake had been talking about their next steps over the phone, big plans about how they were going to take me down for good. And that's when the kicker hit. My old friend had recorded the conversation. I couldn't believe it at first. The timing was too perfect. They were practically spelling out their entire strategy on tape, detailing how they were going to paint me as the villain, twist the facts, and make me look like I was the one in the wrong. And to top it off, they were already talking about their next move, how they were going to get me into a corner and force me to settle. They didn't think they had a thing to worry about. They thought they'd already won. But what they didn't realize was that this was the moment I had been waiting for. With that recording, I could obliterate everything they thought they knew. It was game over. They thought they were the ones playing the system, but they had no idea I had been playing them all along. The pieces were all in place. Now, all I had to do was make my move, and when I did, they'd wish they never even thought about coming after me. But you don't make a move like that without consequences. And as much as I was ready to expose them for everything they were, there was a part of me that wondered, what happens after I win? Would everything really go back to normal? Or would the mess just get worse? Either way, I knew one thing for sure, this wasn't over by a long shot. Alright, so now the fun really starts. The stage is set, the tension's building, and I can almost feel the weight of everything coming to a head. But the thing is, when you're dealing with people who think they've got everything figured out, people who are convinced that they can take advantage of you, it's never as simple as it seems. I had that recording from my old friend, right? The one that had Jake and Sarah practically laying out their whole game plan. The thing about evidence like that? It's like a weapon. You can't just throw it out there willy-nilly. No, you've got to be strategic. You've got to wait for the exact right moment, the precise time when you can hit them where it hurts the most. And I knew exactly what I was going to do. But first, I had to keep up the illusion. I had to play the role of the guy who didn't know what was coming. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me sweat, not while I was so close to turning everything around. So, I kept going through the motions. I met with my lawyer, double-checked all my paperwork, and made sure everything was airtight. I knew Sarah and Jake were watching me, waiting for me to break. But the truth was, I was playing my part perfectly. They just didn't know it yet. The next few days felt like a game of cat and mouse. Every time I thought I had them cornered, they'd shift, change tactics, try something else. Jake would call me, pretending like everything was fine, acting all buddy-buddy, like we hadn't just had that conversation a few days ago where they tried to twist me into a corner. He'd joke around, saying stuff like, "Hey man, I know you're pissed, but you know it's all about fairness, right?" And I'd smile through the phone, pretending like I wasn't about to blow his whole plan apart. Sarah, on the other hand, was playing a different game. She'd text me every now and then, sending these sweet, innocent messages, as if she hadn't just tried to screw me over. "Hope you're doing okay," she'd say, or "I miss the good times we had." It was like she was trying to manipulate me into thinking there was still some good between us. But I wasn't fooled. Not for a second. The truth was, I was starting to enjoy the slow burn of it all. Every little move they made, every little slip-up they had, it was all just adding more fuel to the fire. But the problem was, as much as I knew I was playing my cards right, it was becoming a lot harder to keep my cool. I mean, it's one thing to play a long game, but it's another to hold it all together while your closest friends are trying to tear your life apart. Then came the moment that pushed me over the edge. Jake called me one night, sounding unusually serious. "Listen, man, we need to talk." "I'm getting worried here," he said, his voice sounding strained. "This is getting messy. Sarah's stressing out, and honestly, I don't know how much longer I can keep this up." My jaw dropped, and I had to fight the urge to laugh. "So, they were starting to crack?" Perfect. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. I stayed calm, though, letting him talk. "What do you mean?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "I mean, this whole thing is just spiraling out of control," he said. "Sarah's getting desperate. She's talking about filing for everything, all at once, alimony, child support, all of it. You know she's been through a lot, man. She's not in a good place. We don't want this to get ugly, do we?" I could hear it in his voice, fear. He was scared. And it wasn't because he was worried about Sarah. No, it was because he was worried about the consequences of what they were trying to pull. He knew, deep down, that the walls were closing in. And that's why I knew it was time to start tightening the noose. I didn't let on, though. "Yeah, man, I get it. I'm just trying to keep my head above water here," I said, playing it cool. But on the inside, I was grinning. They were scared. That's the thing with people who think they're in control. They panic the most when they realize they aren't. And it was time to let them know just how out of their depth they were. The next few days felt like a waiting game. Sarah was getting more insistent. She was pushing harder, saying things like, "This isn't about money, it's about what's right. I need to make sure I'm taken care of," and I could practically hear her smirking behind those words. But I wasn't buying it anymore. It wasn't about what was right. It was about revenge. It was about making me pay for what, exactly? I still didn't know. But I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Not now. "Jake?" He was slipping. The cracks in his calm exterior were getting bigger, and every time he reached out, I could sense the desperation in his voice. He was starting to feel the pressure, and the worst part was, he didn't know what was coming. He didn't know that I was about to pull the rug out from under him in the most spectacular way. Then it happened. One night, after one of our usual texts, Sarah sent me something unexpected. It was a photo. A photo of her and Jake, laughing at some bar, arms around each other, looking way too comfortable for my liking. No context, no explanation, just a random photo. But I knew what she was doing. She was trying to push me, to make me jealous, to make me think I was losing her all over again. It wasn't jealousy that hit me, though. It was clarity. They thought they had me on the ropes, but in reality, they were the ones getting tangled in the web they had so carefully spun. They had no idea what I was about to do. But they would. Soon enough, they would. And when they did, it was going to blow their minds. It was the day everything changed, the day they wished they'd never messed with me. I could feel it in my bones. I had been laying low, letting them think they were getting closer, letting them think they had the upper hand. But I knew something they didn't. I had been waiting for them to make their move, waiting for them to trip themselves up, waiting for the exact moment I could drop the bomb. And trust me, I knew exactly when it was coming. I had Jake on the phone again. He was rambling, as usual, trying to sound like everything was cool, like he was still my buddy. But I could tell his nerves were shot. The cracks in his voice were obvious. He was struggling, trying to maintain control of something he no longer had a handle on. Every time he opened his mouth, I could hear it. He was trying to convince me, but it was obvious he was trying to convince himself, too. "Look, Man, Jake said, this is all going way too far. Sarah's getting more worked up about this than she should be. She wants to settle, and I think it's time we sit down, you know? Talk this out like adults. I let the silence drag on. Let him think I was on the edge of breaking. It was all part of the plan. Finally, I spoke, my voice calm and steady. Yeah, sure, Jake. Let's talk. But I'm not doing it on your terms anymore. You've had your shot at this, and now it's my turn. He hesitated. The tension crackled through the phone line. What do you mean by that? I could practically hear him sweating. This was it. The moment I'd been waiting for. I leaned back in my chair, the smirk tugging at my lips. I mean that I'm done being the nice guy in this situation. You both thought you had me, thought I was just some pawn in your little game. But you were wrong. I've been holding all the cards this whole time. And I'm about to play my hand. Jake's breath hitched. What are you talking about? I've got the recordings, Jake, I said, my voice smooth. The ones of you and Sarah planning this whole thing. How you two were going to screw me over, make me pay for everything, manipulate the system. I've got the proof. Everything you've done? It's all right there. There was a long, painful pause, and for the first time since all of this started, I could hear genuine panic in Jake's voice. You don't have that. You're bluffing. I chuckled, a low, dark laugh. You really think I'm bluffing? I've been playing this game for months, Jake. While you were making deals and trying to pull the wool over my eyes, I was a step ahead. I knew exactly what you were doing. Please, man, don't do this, he pleaded. We were just trying to get what's fair. You've got to see that. Fair? I almost laughed. You think it's fair to team up with my ex, twist the system, and try to bleed me dry? That's fair to you? No, Jake. What's fair is that I'm taking this to court, exposing everything you've done. You'll be lucky if you don't end up with more legal trouble than you know how to handle. I could hear him scrambling, but I wasn't done. And let's talk about Sarah. She's been playing the victim, hasn't she? Acting like she's struggling, like she's this poor, heartbroken woman who just wants to get by. But I've got the evidence, too. Everything. Her spending habits, the way she's been living since the divorce, nothing adds up. She's not broke, Jake. She's just pretending. I let the silence stretch out again, feeling that cold rush of satisfaction. They thought they had it all figured out. They thought they were the ones controlling the narrative. But now, I was the one holding all the cards. And I was going to make them pay for underestimating me. Listen, man, Jake said, his voice cracking, this doesn't have to go public. We can still work something out. I wasn't about to let him weasel his way out of this. Oh, we are going public. I'm done with this behind-the-scenes crap. You're going to be exposed for everything you've done. You and Sarah, both of you. And if you try to turn this around on me, if you even think about dragging my name through the mud again, I'll bury you both. You're going to be the ones with your backs against the wall, not me. I could practically hear his brain working overtime, trying to figure out his next move. But it was too late for him. The damage was done, and there was no turning back. I had him cornered. And I was ready to strike. The next morning, I went straight to my lawyer's office, walked in, and dropped the bombshell on him. I handed over all the evidence I'd gathered, everything from the texts, the emails, the financial records, to the recording of Jake and Sarah scheming behind my back. My lawyer looked at the pile of documents and then back at me, his eyes wide. Are you serious? He asked, incredulous. I'm dead serious, I said, feeling that rush of power surging through me. Let's make sure this goes public. Let's make sure the world sees what these two have been trying to pull. I walked out of that office with a sense of satisfaction I can't even describe. The tide had turned. The tables had completely shifted. And now, it wasn't just about winning the legal battle. No, it was about making sure Jake and Sarah understood the price of betrayal. But there was one last thing left to do. One final confrontation. And when I faced them again, they wouldn't know what hit them. The day the court hearing came, I could feel my heart racing in a way it hadn't in months. You'd think after everything that had happened, the long nights, the planning, the quiet satisfaction of knowing they were walking right into my trap, I'd be calm. But there was still that rush, that nervous energy buzzing through me as I walked into that courtroom. I wasn't nervous for me, though. Not at all. I was nervous for them. Jake and Sarah, my ex and my best friend, had no idea what was about to hit them. They had no idea that the entire game had already been rigged in my favor. As soon as I walked in, I saw them. Jake looked like a man on the edge, sweating and fidgeting, glancing around like he was looking for a way out. And Sarah, she had that fake, sympathetic look plastered on her face, the one she always wore when she was trying to manipulate someone into thinking she was the victim. But this time, I could see through it. She was scared. They both were. And rightfully so. The hearing started, and things went exactly as I expected. Sarah did her whole pour me routine, talking about how she was struggling, how she needed financial support to make ends meet. She even threw in a couple of tears, fake, of course. She'd been practicing that act for weeks. And Jake? He was sitting there, nodding along, playing the role of the supportive best friend turned concerned ex. But I was watching them both closely. And the more they spoke, the more I could see their masks slipping. It was my turn to speak, and I felt a wave of confidence wash over me. I stood up, and the entire room seemed to quiet down. I didn't need to shout or make a scene, I just had to lay it all out. I have a different perspective on this, I said, my voice steady but firm. Everything my ex, Sarah, has said is based on a lie. She's pretending to be someone she's not. And my so-called best friend, Jake, has been complicit in this entire scheme. I could feel the eyes of the room on me as I laid out the truth. The recordings, the text messages, the financial records, everything I had painstakingly gathered to prove my case. As I went through each piece of evidence, I saw their faces change. Jake's smug expression faltered, and Sarah's fake tears turned into visible frustration. She was losing control. The turning point came when I dropped the bomb about the recording. The one where they talked about everything, how they were going to force me into submission, how they were planning on making me pay for their decisions. It was all laid out on the table, and their reaction? Priceless. Sarah's face went pale, and Jake, he went from looking slightly nervous to looking absolutely terrified. He knew, at that moment, that everything he and Sarah had worked for was coming undone. I could see him start to shake his head, as if trying to deny it, trying to take back the damage that had already been done. But it was too late. The damage was done to them, not me. When the judge looked over the evidence and then back at Sarah and Jake, the silence in the room was deafening. I could tell they knew what was coming, and it wasn't going to be pretty. Based on the evidence presented, it's clear that the claims made by both parties are not only unsubstantiated but also based on a series of deceitful actions, the judge said, his voice stern. There will be no alimony granted. No child support. And I strongly suggest you both reconsider your positions, as further legal actions could be taken. I sat there, a feeling of satisfaction flooding through me, but I couldn't let myself get too smug. I knew this was just the beginning. They were going to try to twist things, to fight back, but it was over for them. The truth had won. And now, they would have to face the consequences of their actions. Jake was the first to break. He stood up, his face pale, and tried to gather his things, clearly wanting to leave as quickly as possible. He didn't say anything to me. No apology, no attempt at making amends, nothing. He just bolted. I could see him looking back at Sarah as he walked out, like he was waiting for her to follow, but she stayed seated. Sarah, on the other hand, wasn't done. She tried to play it off like it didn't bother her, like she was above all of this. But the cracks were showing. "You think you've won?" she sneered, her voice shaky. "You've only delayed the inevitable." I just shook my head. "You can keep telling yourself that, Sarah, but deep down, you know this is over. You made your play, and you lost. The only thing you've delayed is facing the reality of what you've done." And with that, she stormed out, following Jake into the hallway. I stayed seated for a moment longer, letting the weight of it all sink in. When I walked out of that courtroom, I felt like a weight had been lifted. I wasn't just walking away from the legal battle, I was walking away from a whole chapter of my life that had been filled with lies, betrayal, and manipulation. I had won, sure, but the bigger win was knowing I could walk away from it all with my head held high. Jake and Sarah thought they had me. They thought they could take advantage of me, bleed me dry, and get away with it. But they didn't know who they were dealing with. They didn't know that when you play dirty, you're bound to get burned. And while I'd lost a lot along the way, trust, friendship, a relationship, I gained something bigger, the knowledge that I could handle anything life threw at me. I had become a master of my own fate. And for them? They were left to deal with the consequences of their own greed, deception, and betrayal. They had no one to blame but themselves. As for me, I was ready to move on, to rebuild, and to make sure that no one would ever try to pull something like this on me again.